Have you heard about multiple sclerosis? Of course, right? Well, what about central pain syndrome? Even though more people suffer from CPS than MS, almost no one, not even most doctors, know about this debilitating neurological disease. CPS leaves its victims in unbearable pain all day, every day. Joining me to share their stories of survival and hope for a cure, we have Scott and Karen Davis. Scott has had central pain syndrome for almost 5 years. Louise Mulder, who's been suffering from CPS for 5 years, and she's the first founder of a CPS support community and foundation. And Dr. Forrest Tennant, the go-to authority on central pain syndrome and pain management. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Louise. I know that because it's a neurological disease, the more you think about it and talk about it, the more pain you might be in. So first and foremost, thanks to you and Scott for braving today in this conversation. Louise, you've been dealing with CPS for 5 years. How did you get CPS?
I got CPS in probably what is the best known way. I had a stroke in the thalamus of my brain, which is the portion of your brain that takes all of the sensory signals that are coming up your spine and spreads them out to the proper area of the cortex. And when you have an injury along that pathway, that is what happens to produce the lesions that cause CPS. Death of these particular neurons doesn't necessarily mean that you've lost all feeling. What it means is that you are feeling every sort of pain sensation known to man all at once, all day, for the rest of your life. That is CPS.
Louise, are you in pain right now?
Yes, I'm always in pain. I have been very lucky in that I'm on a few drugs that help tamp it down from a 9, perhaps a 4, but it's always the pain of a sore, a sprained ankle, abscess to something comparable.
And everyone has their own way of dealing with the pain from CPS and describing it. One user actually describes it as the fires of hell, and it's very depressing to hear about this. What are some of the things that people use to kind of overcome this difficult issue?
Well, distraction. There are a lot of people who spend time playing online games as much as they can, just something to focus their attention. A lot of people, unfortunately, turn to other things like drinking. And for spinal CPS patients who have no drugs that will help them at all they can rely on are opiates like methadone or fentanyl patches, topiramate, things like that.
We have a comment from one of our favorite community members, Rona Berry Moran. My body feels like a pincushion. And not everyone is strong enough to deal with this day in and day out.
No. And unfortunately, until there were some treatments, the anticonvulsants, antiepileptics, that brain CPS patients can use, most of the people who suffered from it killed themselves. That was the fate of the very first woman who was clinically diagnosed.
Why do you think not many people, even though so many people deal with this issue, more than deal with MS, why do you think so few doctors are aware, especially even neurologists, why are they not aware of CPS and how to treat patients?
It's really only been in the last 10 years that there has been a clinical assessment of all of these pain syndromes from so many causes as falling under the umbrella diagnosis of CPS. CPS can be caused by anything that can injure your spine, your brain, which means that you've got strokes, epilepsy, MS, you've got closed head injuries like so many of our veterans have. 50% of people with spinal cord injuries end up suffering from this. But because our the way we teach medicine is so specialized. CPS pain for MS patients gets classified as MS pain. People like Scott, who've had surgically related CPS, don't even get a real diagnosis. They get something called, what was it, failed spinal surgery syndrome. It's really only been in the past 10 years, especially following research in Europe, that we've been able to identify CPS as a disease like cancer. You'll have all these different forms of cancer, but they're all one overarching disease. It's the same with CPS.
Rona actually followed up her comment about feeling like a pincushion with, "That's why HuffPost Live is my new addiction. It's a great distraction." And we're talking about individuals. You and Scott are very fortunate to be able to have doctors that acknowledge that you actually do have an illness. But there's been, Louise, in the past, a lot of victim blaming, a lot of blaming of the patient and calling them crazy.
Well, I'm sure Dr. Tennant can speak to this, because he's been doing this for 25 years, and he's one of the very first doctors to even recognize there was such a disease. What happens is that people go in and they complain about this, essentially feeling like they're burning, freezing, and electrical stab pains all day long, all the time, and they're told, there's nothing clinically that we can find that's wrong with you. You're either drug seeking or you are crazy. We had one Alliance member who was actually kept in a mental institution for a year because she would not stop saying that she was dying from pain. Dr. Tennant, what's your experience been? I'm really interested.
Well, first off, I'm delighted to be here, and I'm excited that this issue is getting some attention. Let me just say that as far as describing things, I can't do better than what you've just heard. It's an elegant description. These patients have it, they've experienced it, they know what they're talking about, so I can't add a great deal to that. I can tell you this. As less than 10 years ago, I saw patients that had strokes, had the various neurologic diseases, and physicians did not recognize that. In fact, I had some doctors tell me that you couldn't get pain after a stroke or after MS or after head trauma, that was strictly a psychological problem. So we're coming from this base up till now to where it's not only recognized by pain specialists, but a lot of us are actually trying to do something about it. And I'm pleased to say we're making some small steps.
Dr. Tennant, many people who are suffering with constant debilitating pain aren't even aware that there's actual diagnosis.
You're so right. When doctors don't understand it, they just don't give you a diagnosis. Like today, we've got all kinds of people who are given a diagnosis of fibromyalgia or myofascial pain or psychogenic headache, rather than really getting down to the heart of the matter. I mean, central pain syndrome is a real disease. You've just heard it described where it's there all the time, and it's really due to tissue that's been damaged, and the tissue is inflamed, and it entraps pain signals. It literally embeds them, and it's a real disease. And if you don't at least try to contain it, it spreads. It's actually sort of like a cancer inside the head or the spinal cord, because it'll actually spread and destroy more tissue, and people can become demented, they can become disabled, and they can become vegetables fundamentally if they don't have some very distinct directions on how to go about this.
And luckily we have Scott and his beautiful and strong wife right next to him. Scott, thank you so much for joining us to tell your story.
Thank you for having me. I guess my story is about 5 years ago, almost, I went in for an MRI just 5 days after our daughter was born. And that evening, it was a Friday, my general practitioner called and said, "We have found a multi-chambered egg-sized cystic mass about 4 centimeters deep into your right temporal lobe." After a weekend of worry, we went in and spoke with a neurosurgeon who said, you know, It could have been there since I was, a baby. It could have formed at any time. So, it needed to be dealt with. Most likely, it would just be resected and everything would be okay.
At that time, we never were told that central pain syndrome or thalamic pain syndrome, which was what Scott was originally diagnosed with, even existed. Had we known that, we might have gone into the open biopsy with a little more trepidation.
Yeah, it was, he said, maybe 10 days out of work. So Karen was on maternity leave. We had a bunch of mothers around, grandmothers. And so we decided to go ahead and go through with the surgery. I woke up a day later. I was essentially like I'd had a stroke. I couldn't draw a stick-figured house. My hand would fall off my leg at the hospital every time, and they would be like, "Scott, put your hand back up." Karen was told by a nurse, this is not normal. So, after 10 days of about rehab, I was able to go home after pressing my doctor so that I could get out of there. And essentially everything was still numb at that point. About 3 months later, I finally went into a neurologist because I was feeling just like lightning bolts shooting from my fingertips.
I can remember praying for Scott's feeling to come back on the left side of his body, and just the ironicness of when his feeling came back, it came back as this horrible pain was just, I can remember him calling me at work and saying that he thought he had broken his left foot because it was that much pain. So he went into the emergency room and had, another x-ray, and they said, no, it's not broken. And I think that's when the puzzle of CPS first started to fall into place for us.
I was lucky though. I went to see a neurologist that I was told probably wouldn't be able to do anything anyway. And because of my surgery and the location of everything and the MRIs, he did a couple of tests with some tissue paper and, do you feel this? Can you hear this? What do you hear here? And
he was able to diagnose it right away, which was, a huge blessing, because people do go years not knowing what they've got.
And I said, well, this is great. Now we can do something about it. And he said, well, that's kind of the deal. We can try to treat it. With meds, sometimes it can take years to find a cocktail. And to be quite honest, the cocktail can take me from a 9 to an 8 like it is today. I'm in a lot of pain right now. This is stressful. Stress and anxiety, along with atmospheric conditions, are the two biggest magnifiers for me. And it's worse in my left arm and shoulder. All of the nerves running through my brachial plexus. I've learned so much about anatomy that I never knew before over the past 5 years too.
Well, I'm so sorry this is stressful for you, and I'm sorry that this is something that you have to go through in your life. I have to say, you are very fortunate. You guys seem like an amazing team, and I know, Karen, when you had a newborn baby, this isn't exactly what you thought the plan was.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You go through the 5 stages of grief, basically, denial, and then anger, and then you want to fix it. And we tried everything to fix it. And, I'm so fortunate and blessed to have the family network that Scott and I have. Family has been a huge support. It's so true that it takes a village to raise a family, and, and friends, and, but really, it is, I have to say that being the spouse of someone with this is so isolating, because truly there's, just nobody understands what it's like to day in and day out. I mean, for almost 5 years. Scott and I were married for 1.5 years when this happened. So we've been, almost 5 years of our marriage have been dealing with this. But yeah, we couldn't do it without family and friends, and and then finally you get to acceptance, and and I have to say I'm in and out of acceptance. I'm not always there, but I do the best I can, and I want to be here.
Especially because when you look at him, and that's the problem. You look just like a healthy, sturdy, handsome young man. And so when you're dealing with this, and that's what the world sees, and it's difficult, I know, to have to deal with this. How has this affected your day-to-day life?
In every single way possible. I mean,
are you able to work?
I was. I remember initially going through the outpatient physical therapy, and when I first started feeling these pains, I told them, I can deal with the pain. Just get me back on my skis. I was a passionate snow skier. We backpacked through the Tetons just the summer before. I played guitar very well. I was, and in every way with a stroke, I have no fine motor skills in my left. My hand is so sensitive. I mean, I wear a glove, these winter running gloves. I buy about 5 of them every 4 or 5 months, and I wear it on my left hand so that I don't protect it all day long in the fist. At least it helps me, not worry about that part. But as far as work goes, I was determined, and I had a very fortunate situation with a great employer that worked with me. But I was working 50 hours a week instead of the 40 I was accustomed to before because it took me so long. And concentration is difficult. You find yourself distracting your mind with whatever, and then you have to come back to where it is.
That's one of the hardest things about this disease too, is it just takes, it takes the sufferer probably 20 times longer to do what it takes somebody that doesn't suffer with this. So that's a big adjustment.
Organizational, that's hard. Packing, that's hard.
Well, and organizational, not just of your life, but of also, Karen, of the medications. What medications is Scott on?
Oh my gosh. I don't, let's see, Cymbalta, Provigil, Lyrica, hydrocodone, baclofen, oxycodone, Cymbalta,
just to leave, clonazepam.
Tons of stuff. And that's not the worst part for the spouse, I have to tell you. The worst part is that he has to set his alarm every 6 hours to get up to take this medication. And honestly, right at the beginning when we were still figuring everything out, I thought we were going to have to sleep in separate rooms because the alarm would go off at 2 o'clock every morning, and I wasn't getting any sleep as a new mom. But we did find a pillow that he puts under, and now the pillow vibrates, so that saved us.
Oh, that's kind of amazing, the vibrating pillow. I have so many questions. I'm going to totally email you after this segment. But Dr. Tennant, what Scott and Louise are talking about is something so many people, our viewers, are dealing with. Rona, again, she's having a 9+ day too when it comes to her pain. We also have a comment from Doug Droopsharp. I'm so glad to hear Dr. Tennant speak tonight, the first CPS specialist I've heard, even though I have CPS caused by epilepsy. First and foremost, why can't we get more medical individuals, more neurologists on board? What is the holdup between people recognizing that this type of pain is real and millions are suffering?
Well, I think there is becoming a realization that it is real, and that's a good first step. On the other hand, the neurologists of the country are extremely busy, and they now kind of consider this to be a pain specialist issue. And so within the medical profession itself, you have certain issues of lack of manpower, lack of understanding, lack of resources. So you do have a lot of that. And along that line, that's why I'm very encouraged that the patients themselves are starting to band together and share information. It's a very positive sign, and they need to do that because I'll be honest about it, I have very few resources that I can even refer to myself, and I'm looked at as an expert. So it's difficult to get resources.
Well, one thing's for sure, and here's your website right here, your pain management site. You have few resources, but you yourself are a resource, and you have some really exciting new things that you're working on that really can change the progress of an individual with CPS.
Yeah. Well, we do have a lot of interesting things, and let me pass a couple of things on in case there are people watching or listening that have no resources. Let me just throw out one word that I want everybody to remember, and that's the word oxygen. Remember, the spinal cord and the brain has to live on oxygen, and without enough oxygen, you don't do well. And how do you get more oxygen? Exercise, a lot of breathing, a lot of socialization, a lot of activity, both mental and physical. Remember that, oxygen, you got to have it. Second thing you got to have is you got to have nutrition. Now, there's something about nutrition that's not well appreciated, and that the brain feeds on something called amino acids. Two of them in particular, taurine and glutamine. And everybody who's got central pain syndrome needs to understand they've got to take some supplements of glutamine and taurine above and beyond their regular diet, because those are the amino acids that help build the nerves that control the electrical impulses around central pain. So oxygen and a few amino acids are your first steps. They're cheap, they're simple, everybody can do them. Now, after that, and I think the patients can help them each other with this, they've got to get pain relief, whatever that takes, whatever medications they've got to take, whether it's an opioid or an antidepressant or anti-seizure agent, they've got to get enough pain relief to get out of bed and function and have a life, because if they're just laying around, they don't get any oxygen, they don't get any nutrition, they get depressed, they can even get suicidal. So you've got to get pain relief. Now, once you get some nutrition, you get some oxygen, or you get some pain relief, then you're ready to take the next big step. And the new things today are, first off, hormones. Everybody who's got central pain syndrome needs to have a hormone profile. Doctors are just now learning about it. The brain thrives on about 6 different hormones. And until you have homeostasis of those hormones, you're going to not do too terribly well, because remember, brain tissue is tissue that grows on your hormone levels, and we're trying to teach people and doctors what they are. And then some of those hormones are actually what we call anabolic neurogenic hormones, in which tissue starts to rebuild. This is our new hope, and it's an area of research right now. A lot of people are getting a lot better. I don't know that we're going to cure people who have had strokes or epilepsy or MS, but we can sure get a lot better than what we're doing now. So yes, we have a lot of exciting things going on, but the groups that you're working with tonight, I'm excited. It's a great start.
It is a great start. BB Homebody says oxygen is great and endorphins too, if you can get past the pain to move. One last thing, I hope I'm not putting you on the spot, but I know you've been doing some excellent work with neurosteroids.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, neurosteroids is a new concept, and here's how it works. We used to think that certain hormones, such as pregnenolone, progesterone, and something called DHEA, were only made in the adrenal glands and in the gonads, either the testicle or the ovary. We now know that the brain itself makes these hormones, and they make them specifically to keep inside the cranium, almost to help protect nerves and to regenerate nerves. We're doing studies right now to figure out what the dosages should be, how much you should take, when you should take them. But the concept of neurosteroids is the newest, most exciting thing in all of pain management, really, because it means that we now understand for the first time in history that the brain is sort of an endocrine, it's sort of a gland itself. It makes its own hormones. There are some other hormones, and I'm going to mention their names. Oxytocin is one, human chorionic gonadotrophin is the other, and these are the new kids on the block, and this does offer great hope to millions of people, and we hope we can tell you a lot more about them as time goes on. People need help, they want help, and they're a little ahead of wanting us over what we can tell them a little bit. But nevertheless, these studies are going on, and we're seeing some terrific results in early stages.
Absolutely, and people need hope, want hope. You're here to give it to them. So is Louise. Louise, we're so thankful for your organization, the Central Pain Sydrome Foundation. For more information on CPS, please go to centralpainsydromefoundation.com and practicalpainmanagement.com. And remember, you too can be a part of the conversation, just like our wonderful guests, who I want to thank for being here with us tonight. Thank you so much, Scott and Louise, for pushing through the pain and helping others be survivors too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Scott,
And my thanks to all of you. God love you. Keep going.
And for all of you who might want to join the conversation, make sure you click our red Be an On-Air Guest button on the right, because as you know, the conversation never stops here on HuffPost Live.